"You think you can talk to me like that?" The man sneered, his hand cutting through the air before anyone could breathe, and it connected sharp and vicious right across Martha Cole's face inside Silver Pine Diner. The room stopped. Every fork, every breath. 10 Hells Angels turned their heads in unison. If you believe in standing up for the people who hold this world together, subscribe to this channel and follow every single part of this story. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this reaches. The first thing Martha Cole did every morning was count. Not money, though. God knew she needed to. Not hours. She counted the sounds of the house the way a woman does when she's been holding everything together alone long enough that silence itself becomes something to audit. The creak of Eli's bedroom floor meant he was awake. The rattle of the old radiator meant the pipes hadn't given out overnight. The drip of the kitchen faucet she'd wrapped in electrical tape 3 weeks ago and still hadn't fixed meant another morning had come, and nothing catastrophic had collapsed while she slept. That was the bar. Nothing catastrophic. That was winning. Eli padded into the kitchen in his socks, one of them half off his heel, dragging behind him like a surrender flag. He was 9 years old and still had the face of someone 5 years younger when he first woke up, soft and unguarded eyes not yet adjusted to whatever the world was going to ask of him today. "Grammy, we got eggs." "We got 2, she said, not looking up from the coffee pot. "You want both, or you want to save one for tomorrow?" He thought about it with the gravity of a boy who'd learned that was an actual question, not a hypothetical. "I'll take one. Save the other." She looked at him then. Looked at the way he made that choice without complaint, without even knowing fully what it meant that he had to make it. 9 years old, and already doing math that no child should have to do. "We'll have both," she said. "I'll eat at the diner." She wouldn't, but he didn't need to know that. Martha Cole was 30 years old. People heard that and did the mental calculation, the slight widening of eyes, the recalibration. 30, and already a grandmother. Not by blood, technically. Eli was the son of her younger sister Carrie, who'd left him with Martha 2 years ago when she drove out of Ash Hollow in a car with a cracked windshield and a man named Derek who was nobody's idea of a plan. There'd been a phone call at Christmas, one text in March, nothing since April. Martha had filed for emergency guardianship in the same week she'd replaced all 4 tires on her 2003 Civic and taken a second shift at Silver Pine Diner. She hadn't cried about any of it. Not because she didn't feel it, because crying took time she didn't have. Ash Hollow. Wyoming was the kind of town that had more stories than futures. Population just under 4,000, sitting between 2 mountains that blocked the worst of the wind, but couldn't do anything about the cold, and couldn't do a single thing about the economic kind of cold that had settled in over the last decade. Like a permanent houseguest nobody'd invited. The mill had closed. The highway bypassed them in 2019. The young people left and the old ones stayed, because leaving costs money, and money was the one thing Ash Hollow had stopped making in any reliable quantity. Silver Pine Diner had been on Main Street for 31 years. It had survived 3 owners, 2 floods, 1 fire, that took out the back storage room and half the kitchen, and the particular sustained disaster of American small-town economics. The current owner, Ray Dufresne, was 64 and walked with a limp he'd brought back from a place he didn't name. He paid Martha $11 an hour plus tips and let her start at 6 so she could be done by 2:30 and pick Eli up from school. It wasn't enough. It was never enough. But it was the arithmetic she'd chosen, and she worked inside it without complaint because complaint didn't pay the electric bill. She dropped Eli at school at 7:40, walked into Silver Pine at 7:50, tied her apron without looking down at the knot muscle memory so deep it lived in her hands, not her head. Poured herself a coffee she'd drink standing up between tables. Said good morning to Ray, who was already behind the grill, and already sweating, and already looked like a man who hadn't slept enough, which was accurate because he never did. "Gonna be full today," Ray said. "That bikers rally up at Clearwater Creek pushed a group down this way last night. They'll want breakfast." Martha nodded. She already knew. She'd seen the motorcycles lined up along the side street when she walked in. 10 of them, all Harleys, all big parked with a precision that told you these weren't weekend riders playing dress-up. These were men who'd been riding long enough that the machines were just extensions of themselves. The group came in at 8:15. There were 10 of them. The one who moved first, who held the door and said after you to the man behind him, was named Duke Calloway. She'd learn that later. Right now, he was just the one with the silver beard, and the posture of someone who'd made peace with being intimidating so long ago, it had stopped being a decision and become just a fact. He wore a coat, the leather vest with patches she didn't try to read immediately. None of them did anything loud or dramatic coming in. They just took up space the way large men do when they move together, organized and unhurried and quietly certain of themselves. They took the long booth and 2 four-tops pushed together. One of them younger than the rest, maybe late 30s with a jaw that looked like it had been in at least one serious argument, caught Martha's eye when she came over with menus. "No menus needed," he said. "You got a full breakfast plate. Eggs your way. Bacon sausage toast, hash browns coffee, $8.50. 10 of those, eggs scrambled, coffee for everyone, thank you." She wrote it down. She thanked him back. It was a transaction clean and easy, and she moved toward the kitchen. That was 8:23. Landon Pierce walked in at 8:41. She knew who he was before he said a word because Ash Hollow was small enough that everyone knew whose cars belonged to whom. And the black Mercedes SUV that pulled up outside was registered to Senator Dale Pierce, whose family owned a ranch 40 minutes north and who had won 2 terms on a platform that included, with full sincerity, Wyoming values and hard work and decency. Dale Pierce had never done a hard day's work in his life, which was a fact his constituents knew and had chosen to forgive because he was good-looking and his commercials had horses in them. Landon was Dale's son, 18 years old, home from his first semester at a private university in Denver that cost more per year than Martha made in 3. He came through the door like the room owed him something, scanning the space the way people do when they're deciding whether it's beneath them, and his face went through a visible process of deciding it was, but he'd stay anyway because presumably he needed something. He sat at the counter. Not a booth, not a table. The counter which put him directly in Martha's section. She came over, set a menu in front of him. "Morning. Coffee to start." He didn't look at her. He was looking at his phone, which was a model that cost more than her car. "Yeah, and make it fast. I've got somewhere to be." She poured the coffee, set the cup down. He still hadn't looked up. "You know what you want, or do you need a minute? What's good here? Depends what you like." What a useless answer. He said it flat without heat, which was somehow worse than if he'd been angry. Just a fact in his view. Her answer was useless. Moving on. "Give me the eggs Benedict." "We don't have eggs Benedict." He looked up at her then. For the first time. His eyes did a scan of her face that lasted maybe 2 seconds and communicated something in that 2 seconds that she'd learned to recognize from years behind a counter, the particular assessment that reduces a person to their function. She was the woman who brought food. That was all he saw. "Then what do you have that's not garbage?" "Full breakfast plate's popular. Eggs your way bacon." "Fine, that. Scrambled. And the toast better be actual toast, not that limp bread they serve at the roadside places." "It'll be toast," she said. She put the order in. She went back to refilling coffees at the long booth. Duke Calloway, she still didn't know his name yet, was talking in a low voice to the man across from him, something about a route, something about weather. They were easy customers, which in diner language meant they were good people. They thanked her every time she refilled. They stacked their empty creamers at the edge of the table, so she didn't have to dig for them. Landon Pierce at the counter was already making sounds of impatience. It had been 6 minutes. She brought his food at the 8-minute mark, which was fast for a full plate on a busy morning. Set it down in front of him. He looked at it the way you look at something you've already decided to disapprove of. "The eggs are wet. Scrambled eggs have some moisture in them. I like them dry." "You could have said dry." "I said scrambled." She held his gaze, kept her voice level. "Scrambled and dry are 2 different instructions. If you want them dry, I'll get them redone. Don't bother." He picked up his fork, poked at the plate. "The hash browns are greasy. Hash browns are cooked in oil. That's how hash browns work." The smallest possible elevation of his chin, the breath he took that said, "I cannot believe I have to deal with this," was so practiced it was nearly invisible. But Martha had been reading these moments her whole working life. She had a catalog of them. She went back to her other tables. Behind her at the long booth, one of the men, heavy-set red-beard forearms like bridge cables, had stopped talking and was watching the counter. Not threateningly, just watching. The way a dog watches something it's not sure about, yet deciding. Landon ate in silence for 3 minutes. Then he snapped his fingers. Martha was across the room. She heard it. The sound carried the way those sounds always carry because they're not made to get attention. They're made to demonstrate that getting attention is their right. She finished what she was doing. Set the coffee pot down. Walked back to the counter. "Something wrong." "Refill." He pushed the cup toward her without looking up from his phone. She poured it. He moved his hand, not deliberately, or at least she couldn't say deliberately, she'd never be able to say deliberately, and the cup caught the edge of the saucer wrong and tipped, and coffee went across the counter and onto the front of her apron. "Watch it," he said. To her, as if she'd done it. She grabbed a rag from her apron pocket. Started cleaning the counter. "You should be more careful," he said. She stopped cleaning. Looked at him. "I'll remember that." The sarcasm, gentle controlled, delivered with the precision of someone who'd learned that was the only weapon available to her. In this context, apparently penetrated something because his eyes finally came up fully from his phone. He looked at her. Really looked at her the way he hadn't before. And whatever he saw, it annoyed him. "You got a problem." "I don't have any problem at all." "You've got an attitude." "I'm just working." "You're giving me attitude. I came in here for breakfast, not attitude." At the long booth, Redbeard had gone completely still. Not tense. Still. There's a difference. Tense is a man about to move. Still is a man who's already decided and is waiting for the signal. "I'm sorry you feel that way," Martha said, which was technically true, and contained exactly 0 apology. "Can I get you anything else?" "Yeah, you can get me an apology." "For what?" "For the attitude. For the wet eggs. For the—" He gestured at his plate at the room at her with the wave of someone indicating a general failure of the universe to meet his standards. "I'm sorry your eggs weren't to your liking," she said. "I'll take them off the bill." "I don't care about the bill. My father's worth—" He stopped himself. Recalibrated. Smiled. "You know who my father is. Senator Pierce." The smile widened. "So you know." "I know." "Then you know this isn't a place that can afford to treat the wrong people badly." The diner had gone quiet by degrees. Not all at once, that would have been too dramatic, too obvious. But in the way that sound drains from a room when something is happening, that everyone senses the conversations at other tables had lowered. The clinking of silverware had slowed, and the quality of the silence around them had changed. "Mr. Pierce," Martha said, "I've treated you the same way I treat everyone who comes through that door. You'll get your breakfast comped on the eggs, and I hope you have a good rest of your morning." She picked up the coffee pot and turned. That was when he reached out and grabbed her wrist. Not hard. He didn't need to grab hard. The point wasn't force. The point was entitlement. The unconscious certainty that he had the right to stop her from walking away, that his wanting her attention made his hand on her wrist an appropriate thing. She stopped. Looked down at his hand. Looked back at him. "Let go of my wrist." "I'm not done talking." "You need to let go of my wrist." "When I'm done." The man with the silver beard, Duke Calloway, was already standing up. He didn't rush. He didn't make a sound that wasn't the creak of the booth and the quiet knock of his coffee cup being set down. He stood at his full height, which was considerable, and he crossed the diner floor with the kind of unhurried deliberateness that is more frightening than urgency, because urgency can be reasoned with, and this could not. He stopped on the other side of the counter. directly across from Landon. Close enough that Landon would have to look up to meet his eyes. "Son," Duke said. His voice was quiet, measured, the voice of a man who'd stopped needing to raise it a long time ago. "The lady asked you to let go of her wrist." Landon released her arm. Not because he wanted to. Because some part of his nervous system, the animal part that was smarter than the rest of him, had registered something and overridden his pride. He looked at Duke. Took in the full picture, the silver beard, the kuti, the patches, the men seated at the tables behind him, who had all now oriented subtly but completely toward this counter. "Mind your business," Landon said. His voice was steady. He had practice at this. "This diner is my business," Duke said. "These people are my business. The woman you just put your hand on is my business." He paused. "That answer your question?" "She works here. She's a waitress. She needs to what?" The question sat there. Duke didn't move. Landon's jaw worked. "She spilled coffee on me." "She spilled coffee on herself," Duke said. "I saw it from across the room. She's got an attitude problem. She's been polite to you since you walked in. I watched that too. You were watching me. I watch a lot of things." Duke's eyes hadn't moved from Landon's face. "That's a habit you pick up when you've spent enough time in places where not paying attention can get you killed." Landon blinked. He wanted to escalate. Martha could see it, the internal pressure building behind his eyes, the frustration of someone who'd always gotten his way through a combination of name-dropping and low-grade intimidation and was now standing in front of something he didn't have a word for. "My father—" "Your father's not here," Duke said. "Simply, factually. You are." The red-bearded man had risen from the table. Two others followed. Not aggressively. They just stood. Which was enough. Landon looked at them. Looked back at Duke. Looked at Martha. She was watching him. Not with anger, not with triumph, with the flat, patient look of someone who'd been waiting a long time for the world to catch up to what she already knew. "This is ridiculous," Landon said. "Pay your bill," Duke said. "Tip the lady. Walk out the door. That's the only thing that happens next." "You can't—" "Pay your bill," Duke said again. Same volume, same tone, as if he had unlimited amounts of both and Landon was welcome to use up all the time he needed. Landon's hands were flat on the counter. He was 18 years old and in a diner in Wyoming, and 10 veterans of something unnamed were standing between him and whatever he thought was going to happen. His phone was in his pocket. His father was 40 minutes north. His usual Tools Authority money implication had no purchase on the surface of this moment. He reached into his wallet, pulled out cash, put it on the counter without counting it, which was either carelessness or the last act of defiance available to him. He stood up, straightened his jacket, looked at Martha one more time. "This isn't done," he said. Martha picked up his plate, his cup, the cash on the counter, $80 for a $12 meal, which she noticed and said nothing about. "Have a good morning, Mr. Pierce," she said. He walked out. The bell above the door chimed once, bright and indifferent. The diner held its breath for exactly 3 seconds. Then someone at a corner table started clapping. Slow at first. Then the booth across joined in. Then the couple by the window. It wasn't theatrical, it was the sound of people releasing something they'd been holding, the relief of a room that had been waiting to see if the world was going to work the way it was supposed to, and had just provisionally been reassured. Duke Calloway sat back down, picked up his coffee cup, looked at Martha across the counter. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm fine," she said, which was true technically, which was the answer she always gave. He nodded. Looked at her for a moment longer, the kind of look that doesn't accept that answer at face value, but doesn't push it either. The look of someone who knows the difference between fine and holding. "You always work mornings?" he asked. 6 to 2:30, 5 days. "And then?" "Pick up my grandson from school." Something moved in his face. Not pity. She would have felt pity. It was something else, recognition maybe. the look of a person who understood what it cost to just keep going. "Good kid. Best kid," she said, without hesitation, without qualification. "Best kid. The way you say something when you mean it so completely that anything extra would dilute it." Duke nodded again. He drank his coffee. The diner returned to its Sounds Forks conversation, Ray's Grill. The bell above the door, someone laughing at the far table. Martha tied her apron tighter and went back to work. She was refilling coffee at the far booth when her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. She didn't check it until the next lull. It was a number she didn't recognize, Wyoming area code. She almost didn't answer. She answered, "Is this Martha Cole?" A woman's voice. Professional. Clipped. "It is." "This is Patricia Weiss, administrative assistant to Senator Dale Pierce. The senator would like to speak with you about an incident this morning at a diner in Ash Hollow." Martha looked out the window at the empty parking space where the Mercedes had been. "Would he?" she said. "He's available this afternoon, 2 o'clock. She thought about Eli's school pickup at 2:30. She thought about the 45-minute drive to the Pierce Ranch and 45 minutes back. She thought about the $80 still folded in her apron pocket. "Tell the senator," she said, "that I work until 2:30. If he wants to talk, he knows where I am." She hung up. At the long booth, Duke Calloway was watching her with the same unhurried attention he'd given to everything else this morning. She caught his eye. He raised his coffee cup slightly. Not quite a toast, not quite a question, just an acknowledgement. She picked up the coffee pot, went back to work. Outside, the motorcycles sat in a quiet row in the morning light chrome, catching the pale Wyoming sun, still and patient, as everything these men had already survived. And somewhere north on Route 17, a black Mercedes SUV was moving fast, and in it was a boy who believed this morning had been a humiliation. He had not yet understood that it was a beginning. The call from Patricia Weiss was not the last one Martha received that day. By the time she locked up her section at 2:15 and untied her apron, her phone had rung 4 more times. 2 unknown numbers. One from Ray, who'd already heard something through the Ash Hollow grapevine that moved faster than cell signal in this town. And one from a number she recognized immediately, and had not expected Janet Briggs, who ran the elementary school where Eli attended 3rd grade, and who never called Martha unless something had gone wrong with Eli, which meant Martha's heart was in her throat for the 11 seconds it took her to listen to the voicemail. Eli was fine. Janet wasn't calling about Eli. "Martha, it's Janet. Listen, I don't want to alarm you, but Dale Pierce's office called the school this afternoon. They were asking about your guardianship status, about Eli. I thought you should know. Call me back." Martha stood in the diner parking lot and listened to that message 3 times. Then she put her phone in her pocket and stood very still for a moment, the way she did when she needed to keep herself from doing something she couldn't take back. The cold air came off the mountains in a long, slow exhale. She let it hit her face. Then she got in her car and drove to pick up Eli. He came out of the school doors the way he always did, backpack too big for his frame, one strap hanging off a shoulder, scanning the pickup line with the focused expression of a kid who'd learned not to assume someone would be there, and was always quietly relieved when they were. He saw her car. His face changed. That relief, immediate and unguarded, and so clearly something he hadn't learned to hide yet, it hit her every single time like something physical. He climbed in, dropped his backpack. "How was your day?" she asked. "Okay. Dylan said my shoes were old." "What did you say?" "I said they still work." She pulled out of the line. "Good answer." He was quiet for a block. Then, "Grammy, are we in trouble?" She kept her eyes on the road. "Why would we be in trouble?" "Mrs. Briggs called me into her office today. She asked me stuff about home, like if I had everything I needed. Like if things were good." He paused. It felt like a trouble kind of question. Martha's hands were steady on the wheel. "We're not in trouble," she said. And then, because this was Eli, and he deserved the actual truth wrapped in a version he could carry. Some people are being unpleasant right now, but unpleasant people don't win just by being unpleasant. Okay. He thought about it. Okay, he said. Can we have grilled cheese tonight? We can have grilled cheese tonight. He turned on the radio to a station that played old country songs he didn't know the words to, but hummed along to anyway, and Martha drove them home, and she did not let herself think about Dale Pierce until Eli was fed and doing his homework at the kitchen table. Then she sat in the other chair, and she thought about it. She was still thinking about it when her doorbell rang at 7:15. She wasn't expecting anyone. She opened the door with the particular wariness of a woman alone with a child who's recently learned that powerful people know where she works, and found Duke Calloway on her porch. He wasn't alone. The man with the red beard was with him, standing 2 steps back. Hands in his jacket pockets, posture deliberately non-threatening in the way of someone who'd learned that his size required management. "Ms. Cole," Duke said, "I apologize for coming to your home. We asked Ray for your address. I told him why, and he decided it was all right." She looked at him. "Why?" "Because Dale Pierce's office made 3 phone calls today. 1 to your employer, 1 to your son's school, 1 to Teton County Family Services." The cold that moved through her had nothing to do with the temperature. "Come in," she said. Duke sat at her kitchen table like a man who'd sat at 10,000 kitchen tables and knew that the right way to do it was to take up no more space than invited. The red-bearded man, whose name turned out to be Garrett, who turned out to be a retired Army combat medic from Billings, stayed near the door. Eli came out of his room to investigate and stopped at the hallway entrance, sizing up the visitors with the careful assessment of a kid who'd learned to read rooms. "These your friends?" Eli asked Martha. "Getting there," she said. Eli looked at Duke. "You're really big." "I am," Duke said. "Do you ride motorcycles?" "Since before you were born." Eli considered this the way he considered everything, with more seriousness than his face suggested. "Cool," he said finally, and retreated back to his room, which was apparently sufficient vetting. Duke watched him go. Then he looked at Martha. "The call to family services was an inquiry," he said. "Not a formal complaint? Not yet. But the woman I spoke to, her name is Sandra Okafor. She's the senior caseworker, told me off the record that when Senator Pierce's office makes inquiries, they generally have enough weight behind them to prompt a home visit within 72 hours. On what basis? Fitness of guardian. Stability of home environment." He paused. "Financial capacity." Martha looked at the table. At the scratch in the wood she'd been meaning to sand down. At the ring from Eli's glass that she kept forgetting to clean. At the kitchen of a woman living as close to the edge as a person can live without going over and still calling it living. "He's doing this because his kid got embarrassed in a diner," she said. "His kid has a habit of getting protected from consequences," Duke said. "Dale Pierce has spent 18 years making sure nothing lands on that boy. This morning something landed on him in front of witnesses, and Dale's response is what it always is. He goes after the person who can't fight back." Duke didn't answer that directly, but his jaw moved slightly, which was answer enough. "What do I do?" Martha asked. "First thing," Duke said, "is you don't do it alone." She looked at him. There was something in the directness of his gaze, not kindness exactly, but something that came from the same place. Kindness comes from something grounded and certain. "You don't know me," she said. "You had breakfast in my diner." "I know what I saw this morning," Duke said. "And I know what these calls mean. I've been in enough places where powerful people used paperwork as a weapon against people who couldn't afford lawyers." He folded his hands on the table, big hands scarred across the knuckles in ways that told their own history. "We have a lawyer. He's good. He does family law, he does civil suits, he's done pro bono work for veterans' families for 20 years. His name is Frank Adler. I'd like to have him call you tonight if you're willing." Martha was quiet for a moment. "Why?" she asked again. Not suspiciously, genuinely. She needed to understand the architecture of this. Duke was quiet for a moment himself. Then, You ever serve anybody, Ms. Cole, military, I mean? No, I did. 22 years. Garrett there did 16. Most of the men you met this morning, they did their time somewhere in something. And when you come back from that, you carry a lot of things. Some of them are bad. Some of them... He stopped, looked at his hands. Some of them is just a sense of what's right and what's wrong that gets very simple when you've seen enough of both. He looked up. What happened to you this morning was wrong. What's happening now is wrong. Simple. She held his gaze for a long moment. Have Frank call me, she said. Frank Adler called at 8 o'clock. He had the voice of a man who was used to delivering complicated information calmly, who'd learned that panic was contagious, and calm was too, and had made a professional choice about which he'd rather spread. He walked her through the situation in 20 minutes. The family services inquiry had been triggered. It was, as Duke said, not yet a formal complaint, but the window between inquiry and formal investigation was narrow, and the standard response of anyone in Martha's position was to do nothing and hope it went away, which was exactly what Dale Pierce was counting on. He's using the system as a scarecrow, Frank said. He doesn't necessarily want to take your grandson. He wants you scared. Scared people don't file harassment complaints. Scared people don't talk to reporters. Scared people retreat. What do I do? We file first, Frank said. Tomorrow morning. We document this morning's incident witness statements from the 10 men in that diner from any other customers present, and we file a report with the sheriff's office on the physical contact his son made with your wrist. Then we file a formal complaint with the State Ethics Commission regarding Senator Pierce's office using political influence to trigger a welfare inquiry in what is clearly a retaliatory context. We make noise before he does. Will that work? It'll change the shape of the conversation. Right now, he's moving in the dark. We turn the lights on. She was quiet. On the other side of the wall, she could hear Eli's breathing. He'd fallen asleep with his light on, which he did whenever she forgot to check. 9 years old, and already the weight of him in that room, the specific gravity of someone depending on you, was the thing that made every decision both harder and clearer. Do it, she said. She didn't sleep until 2 in the morning. At 9 the next day, Frank Adler filed the papers. By noon, 3 things had happened. The first was that the Ash Hollow Sheriff's Office had received the report regarding the wrist incident and opened a file. The deputy who took the report, whose name was Torres, who'd gone to school with Martha's older sister, and who had himself a certain well-known opinion of Dale Pierce's particular brand of Wyoming values, was thorough in a way that suggested he was not displeased to be thorough. The second was that the Ethics Commission complaint had been received and logged, which meant it was now, however, modestly, a matter of record. The third was that somebody had filmed it. Martha didn't know about the video until Cheryl Hatch, who was the other full-time waitress at Silver Pine, and who was also 27 and had very little patience for nonsense of any variety, came into the diner at 11:30 on her day off and put her phone on the counter in front of Martha with the screen facing up. 12,000 views, Cheryl said. Since this morning. Martha looked at the screen. Someone she'd find out later it was a trucker named Bev, who'd been in the far corner booth with her coffee and her logbook, had filmed the last 2 minutes of the exchange. The angle was partial, catching mostly Martha's back and Landon's face, and crucially, the moment his hand closed around her wrist. And then Duke rising from the booth. And the quiet, devastating conversation that followed. The caption read, Senator Pierce's son grabs waitress in Wyoming diner. Bikers step in. Watch what happens. 12,000 views at 11:30 in the morning. Cheryl, Martha said, I know. This is going to get worse before it gets better. Or, Cheryl said, picking up her phone, it gets big enough that getting worse isn't an option for him anymore. She pocketed it, retied her ponytail. You need help today, I'll cover a section for free. Martha looked at her. You don't have to do that. I know I don't have to. That's what I'm telling you, I want to. Yumi Ray, this diner we've been making each other's lives survivable for 3 years. You think I'm going to stay home and watch this on my phone? She picked up an apron from the hook. Tell me what needs doing. By 2 o'clock, the video had 47,000 views. By the time Martha picked up Eli from school, it had crossed 100,000. She found this out because Duke called her in the pickup line. "You've seen it," he said. "I've seen it. My guys and I are going to be visible in town for a few days. Not aggressive, just present. People need to see that you have community around you. I don't want trouble for you. We know how to navigate trouble. That's not a concern." He paused. "There's something else. Landon Pierce drove past the diner twice this afternoon. Didn't stop, just drove past." She watched Eli emerge from the school doors. Backpack strap hanging. That searching look, then the relief. "He's 18, she said. Doing what his father told him to do. Possibly. Or doing what 18-year-old boys do when they're used to having no consequences and suddenly have some, they orbit the thing they're angry about. Is that dangerous? Right now it's information, Duke said. I'll let you know if it becomes more than that. Eli got in the car, dropped his backpack. Grammy Dillon said you're on the internet. She pulled out of the line. What did you say? I said, yeah, probably. Is that right? Yeah, she said. That's right. He absorbed this with the equanimity of a 9-year-old for whom the internet was simply where everything was eventually. Are you in trouble? No. Is the big motorcycle man helping? She almost smiled. He is. Good. Eli turned on the radio. He seemed okay. Dale Pierce called her directly at 4:17. She almost didn't answer. She did answer because Frank Adler had told her to, because the record of the call was more useful than the avoidance of it, because letting Dale Pierce go to voicemail was letting him stay in the dark, and the point now was lights on. Ms. Cole. His voice was the voice from the campaign commercials. Warm. Measured. The voice of a man who had practiced sincerity until it was technically indistinguishable from the real thing. I want to start by apologizing for my son's behavior. She waited. Landon is young. He's impulsive. What happened this morning was inappropriate, and I want you to know I've spoken to him about it. She waited. I think we can resolve this quietly and in a way that's good for everyone. I'd hate for something this minor. Minor, she said. A beat. I understand you're upset. He grabbed my wrist, Senator, in front of witnesses on camera, after insulting me for 20 minutes. And then your office called my employer, my grandson's school and family services. Her voice was steady. She'd had 4 hours to decide what she was going to say and how she was going to say it. I'd like to hear your definition of minor. Silence. When Dale Pierce spoke again, the campaign voice had modulated slightly, not gone, just adjusted, like a man shifting a weight from one hand to the other. Those calls were made in error. I've already addressed that internally. Your error or your assistant's error. Ms. Cole. I'd like that in writing, she said. That the calls were made in error, the one to family services specifically. My attorney can send you the format. Another silence, longer. You have an attorney. I do. That seems... He caught himself, started again. That seems like an escalation. Senator, Martha said, you escalated this when you called family services about my 9-year-old grandson because your 18-year-old son grabbed a waitress in a diner and got corrected for it. She paused. I'm happy to de-escalate, but I need to know your grandson isn't going to lose the person who's keeping him safe because you're embarrassed. Can you give me that? The silence this time was different, not calculating. Something less comfortable than calculation, the silence of a man who had perhaps for the first time in a long time heard himself clearly. I'll have my office send a retraction to family services, he said. Thank you. And the attorney. Stays on, she said, in case I need him. She hung up. Her hands were shaking. Not from fear, from the sustained effort of holding herself completely level for the duration of that call. She sat in her kitchen chair and put her hands flat on the table and breathed until they stopped. From the other room, Eli called, Grammy, can I have a snack? What do you want? Apple. in the bowl on the counter. She heard him padding out to the kitchen, heard the apple being picked up, heard him head back toward his room, heard him stop. Grammy. Yeah. You okay? She looked at the table. At the scratch, the ring, the imperfect surface of a life lived in the real. I'm good, baby, she said. I'm real good. The next morning, the video had 400,000 views. And at 6:58, 2 minutes before Silver Pine Diner opened, Landon Pierce's Mercedes pulled into the parking lot. He didn't get out right away. He sat in the car for 4 full minutes. Martha could see him through the window, or rather, she could see the car, the dark glass, the engine running, the deliberate stillness of someone working up to something they didn't know how to do. Ray came up beside her. Want me to call somebody? Not yet, she said. The car door opened. Landon Pierce got out. He was wearing different clothes from yesterday, a plain jacket, no branded anything, nothing that announced anything. He stood by his car for a moment. Then he walked toward the door. The bell chimed. He stepped inside, looked at Martha. His face was different from yesterday. Not humble, he wasn't there yet, not even close. But something had broken through whatever insulation his life had provided between him and the experience of consequence. He looked like someone who hadn't slept, like someone who'd watched a video of himself 400,000 times in his head and hadn't liked what he'd seen. I need to talk to you, he said. You can sit at the counter, she said. Coffee. He blinked, like he'd been ready for a fight and found a chair instead. Yeah, he said. Yeah, okay. She poured his coffee, set it in front of him. He wrapped both hands around the cup, not the posture of yesterday, not the posture of someone who thought the world owed him warmth. The posture of someone who was cold. He opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. My father said. He stopped, shook his head, tried a different entry point. The video. I watched it. Okay. He stopped again. Something was working in his face, some internal machinery grinding against years of insulation. I look like a really bad person. Martha held his gaze. She said nothing. Am I? He asked. And the question was so unguarded, so stripped of the performance of yesterday, that it took her a moment to recognize it as genuine. She thought about Eli choosing to save one egg. She thought about Janet Briggs's phone call. She thought about family services and Dale Pierce's smooth voice and 400,000 strangers watching her wrist get grabbed. I think, she said slowly, that you've never had to find out. He looked at his coffee. That's worse, he said quietly. Isn't it? She picked up the coffee pot. Tables were starting to fill. The diner was waking up around them, the morning crowd coming in with their noise and their orders and their ordinary complicated lives. I've got customers, she said. When you figure out what you came here to say, I'll be around. She walked away from him. Behind her, Landon Pierce sat at the counter with his coffee and his conscience, and the particular discomfort of a person who has run out of insulation and is feeling the cold for the first time. And outside in the parking lot, 3 motorcycles had appeared, quiet chrome catching the early light, their riders sitting still and watchful, as they always were, as they would be for as many mornings as it took. Landon stayed at the counter for 40 minutes. He didn't order food. He nursed the coffee Martha had poured him, and he watched her work, not the way he'd watched her the first morning, not with that flat dismissive scan that reduced her to her function. He watched the way a person watches something they're trying to understand. The way you look at a machine you've just realized is more complicated than you thought. She moved through this diner with the economy of someone who'd done this so many times that her body had its own intelligence. She knew which table needed refilling before they raised a hand. She knew when Ray was about to fall behind on the grill and started staggering her orders accordingly. She carried 4 plates on 2 arms without spilling anything, held 3 separate conversations simultaneously without losing the thread of any of them, and did all of it while keeping one part of her attention quiet, consistent, unannounced on the boy sitting at her counter who was trying to figure out how to say something. By the time the morning rush thinned, Landon had worked himself around to it. I want to apologize, he said when she came back to refill his cup. She set the coffee pot down, looked at him. Okay. I mean, actually apologize. Not the thing my father made me do on the phone last night where he stood in the room and told me what to say. His jaw tightened. That one didn't count. What did your father tell you to say? That I was sorry for any misunderstanding, that my behavior was influenced by stress and wasn't representative of my character. He said it flatly, clearly reciting. He'd already written it out. I just had to deliver it. Martha looked at him for a moment. And what do you want to say? Landon looked at his coffee cup, turned it once in his hands. I was an ass, he said. I came in here and I treated you like you were furniture, like you didn't count. He looked up. And when you pushed back even a little, I got angry because nobody's ever... He stopped, started again. I'm not used to being told no, by anyone, about anything. I know, Martha said. That's not an excuse. I didn't say it was. He exhaled. I don't know how to fix it. She leaned against the counter, crossed her arms not defensively, just the posture of a woman who spent enough time on her feet that leaning was a luxury. What did you think was going to happen when you drove out here this morning? I don't know. I thought maybe you'd... I don't know. Yell at me. Throw me out. He almost smiled, but it didn't make it all the way. That would have been easier, actually. Easier than what? Than this, than you being... He gestured slightly at her at the diner at everything. Normal, like it's just Tuesday. It is just Tuesday, she said. I have 11 tables and a dishwasher that keeps cycling wrong, and Ray burned the first batch of bacon, so we're behind. Tuesday. He was quiet. Mr. Pierce, she said, and he flinched slightly at the name. The same name his father carried the weight of it landing differently now. What you did was wrong. What your father did afterward was worse. But you're here, and you're not reading from a script this time, so I'm listening. She picked up the coffee pot. That's more than most people get. She walked away to take an order at table 4. Duke Calloway came in at 9:15. He came alone this time. Sat at the counter 2 seats down from Landon, ordered coffee and the full plate, and acknowledged Landon with a single look that was not hostile and not warm, and contained in its neutrality more judgment than either of those would have. Landon looked back at him. Mr. Calloway. Duke looked at him steadily. You remember my name. I looked you up last night. Landon's voice was careful. You did 2 tours in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan. Purple Heart, Bronze Star. He paused. I didn't know any of that when I talked to you yesterday. Would it have changed anything? Landon thought about it honestly, which was itself a change from 24 hours ago. I don't know, he admitted. It shouldn't matter, but I don't know if it would have. Duke picked up his coffee. At least that's true. I'm trying... Landon stopped, pressed his hands flat on the counter. I'm trying to figure out what the right thing to do here is. Not the thing my father says is right. The actual right thing. What does your father say? He says to wait it out. The video will blow over. People forget. Pay whatever needs paying sign, whatever needs signing. Let the lawyers handle it. Landon's voice had a quality to it now that hadn't been there before, a friction like something grinding against something else inside him. He's probably right. He usually is about that kind of thing. About making things go away. Yeah, Duke set his cup down. Son, making things go away is not the same as making things right. Your father has spent a long time confusing those two things. You've spent 18 years watching him do it. He looked at Landon directly. The question is whether you want to keep doing it his way or figure out your own. Landon stared at the counter. Martha had come back within earshot. She didn't interrupt. What would your way look like? Landon asked Duke. Wouldn't be my way, Duke said. Has to be yours. But I'll tell you what I've seen work when a person actually wants to fix something instead of just look like they're fixing it. He paused. You show up. You do the work. You stop treating it like a transaction, Like if you pay enough or say the right thing, the debt clears. It doesn't clear that way. It clears when the person you hurt actually feels it. When the situation actually changes. What does that mean here? Duke looked at Martha. Ask her. Landon turned. Martha was standing at the counter, coffee pot in hand, watching him with the same level patient attention she'd given him since he walked in. What do you need? Landon asked her. And this time, it was an actual question, not rhetorical, not performed, not the prelude to an offer he'd already designed. She didn't answer right away. She thought about it the way she thought about things that mattered seriously without rushing, because she'd learned that the first answer wasn't always the true one. 60 days, she said finally. He blinked. What? 60 days of work. Here. Real work. Bussing tables, washing dishes, taking orders when it's slow enough that Ray doesn't have a stroke watching. 6 in the morning to 2 in the afternoon, 5 days a week. She held his gaze. You want to know what my life is? Live next to it for 60 days. Landon's mouth opened. Closed. I'm supposed to go back to school in... Your semester doesn't start until January. I know because your father mentioned it on the news when you came home for break. She tilted her head slightly. That gives us 6 weeks. My father will never agree to... I'm not asking your father, she said. I'm asking you. The diner had gone quiet in that particular way again. Not dramatically, just the way it does when something real is happening, and the room instinctively clears space for it. Landon Pierce sat very still. Then he said, starting when? Tomorrow, Martha said. 6 a.m. Wear something you don't mind ruining. She walked away to tend to table 7. Duke picked up his fork and started on his eggs. Dale Pierce arrived at Silver Pine Diner at 11:45 that morning. He didn't call ahead. He just came, a man who'd never needed to announce himself because the world in his experience arranged itself around his arrivals. He came in a different car from Landon's Mercedes, a dark blue pickup that was calculated to say regular guy in the same way his campaign commercials were calculated to say regular guy. The calculation itself being the thing that made it not true. He was taller than Martha expected from television. Silver at the temples, built like someone who had once been athletic and had preserved enough of it to still carry the confidence. He came in, saw his son at the counter, and did something with his face that was either surprise or a very good imitation of it. Landon. He said it with a warmth that didn't reach his eyes. I've been looking for you. Landon turned on his stool. Something in his posture changed, not quite a flinch, not quite a straightening. Something between the two. I texted you where I was. I know. I wanted to... Dale's eyes moved to Martha, who was behind the counter watching him with the same level attention she gave everything. He shifted into the campaign voice so smoothly it was almost seamless. Ms. Cole, it's good to finally meet you in person. Senator, she said. He extended a hand. She shook it. He held it a beat too long, the handshake of a man who'd learned that control of the physical duration of a greeting was a small way to establish hierarchy. She pulled her hand back. I was hoping we could speak, he said, about a resolution that works for everyone. We can speak, she said. You want coffee? Sure, thank you. He sat not at the counter but at the nearest table, a choice that was also a move. Get off the counter where the power dynamic had been established and onto neutral ground. He gestured at the chair across from him. She came around with 2 cups, sat down. Duke was at the counter. He'd stopped eating. His back was to the table, but his posture said he was hearing every word. I want to start by saying that the calls my office made were inappropriate, Dale Pierce said. He sounded like he meant it. He was very good at sounding like he meant things. The call to the school particularly. I have a grandson myself, and I understand... You called family services, Martha said. I'd like to start there. His jaw flexed almost imperceptibly. That call was made by a staff member who overreacted to the situation. I've addressed it internally. The inquiry has been formally closed. You should receive written confirmation today. I did, she said. Frank Adler's office forwarded it this morning. Dale Pierce absorbed the name of the attorney without showing anything. Good. Then that's resolved. He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. His hands were smooth in the way that money makes hands smooth. "I'd like to talk about the video." "What about it?" "It's at 600,000 views this morning." He said it not with alarm, but with the precision of someone who'd been tracking it. "These things tend to build, and then they fade. I'd like to help them fade." He looked at her steadily. "I'm prepared to offer a settlement. Compensation for distress for any impact on your employment for—" "I don't want your money," Martha said. A pause. "Everyone." "I have a counteroffer," she said. Dale Pierce blinked. Whatever he'd expected negotiation relief, a number it wasn't counteroffer. "I'm listening." Landon agreed this morning to 60 days of work at this diner. Real work. Mornings 5 days a week starting tomorrow. She held his gaze. "I want you to agree to that too. Not just not stop it, actively support it. If he shows up and calls you to come get him because it's too hard, you tell him to stay." Dale Pierce stared at her. "In exchange," Martha said, "I don't pursue the harassment filing beyond what's already been submitted. The video exists, and I can't control it, but I don't give interviews, I don't comment publicly, I don't add to whatever's already built." She paused. "And one more thing." "What?" "Landon's tuition money, 1 semester's worth, goes into an education fund for children in this county whose families can't afford school supplies, extracurriculars, or tutoring. Anonymous. Managed by the school district, not by your office." She folded her hands on the table. "That's what I want." The diner was very quiet. Dale Pierce looked at his son, who was sitting at the counter watching his father, with an expression Martha couldn't fully read, something between braced and hopeful, the look of someone waiting to see who a person really is. Then Dale looked back at Martha. "You're not what I expected," he said. "I get that a lot," she said. He was quiet for a long moment. The kind of quiet that is actually calculation, and then becomes something else when the calculation doesn't produce a comfortable answer, and then becomes something else still when the person doing the calculating looks at their own son's face and sees something there they don't have a ready response to. "Done," he said. The word came out with less friction than Martha expected. As if some part of him buried deep under the campaign ads and the smooth voice and the 20 years of insulation had been waiting for someone to just tell him what the right thing was and hold still long enough for him to do it. She nodded. "I'll have Frank draw up a simple agreement. Nothing adversarial, just the terms." "Fine." He stood, buttoned his jacket, looked at Landon. 6 a.m. tomorrow." Landon met his father's eyes. "Yeah." "Don't be late." He picked up his coffee, drank the rest of it standing, set the cup down. "Ms. Cole, you make good coffee." "Ray makes good coffee," she said. "I just pour it." Dale Pierce almost smiled. It was the most genuine thing his face had done since he walked in. He put $40 on the table, which was $38 more than 2 coffees cost, and walked out. The bell chimed. Martha sat at the table for a moment. Just a moment, long enough to breathe. Then Cheryl was at her shoulder. 600,000 views, she said quietly. "And you just got the senator to fund school supplies for half the county." "Stop." "I'm just wishful, Cheryl." I know. But Cheryl was smiling in the way of someone who can't help it. "Table 9 needs a refill." Martha stood, picked up the coffee pot. At the counter, Duke Calloway had gone back to his eggs. He didn't say anything. He didn't look over. But as Martha passed behind him, he raised his coffee cup slightly. That same almost toast, that same acknowledgement that was more than an acknowledgement, the gesture of a man communicating something he didn't have or need the words for. She refilled his cup without being asked. The next morning, Landon Pierce was standing outside Silver Pine Diner at 5:50. Martha pulled into the parking lot at 5:54 and found him there in a plain jacket and jeans, hands in his pockets, breath making small clouds in the cold Wyoming air. He'd brought nothing with him. No phone visible, no coffee, no armor of any kind. "You're early," she said. "I didn't want to be late," he said. She unlocked the door, held it open. He walked past her into the cold darkness of the diner, into the smell of old coffee and dish soap, and the particular warmth of a kitchen where someone has already started the grill. Ray was there. He looked at Landon, said nothing for a full 5 seconds. Then, "You ever wash dishes before?" "No," Landon said. "You ever carry more than 2 plates at a time?" "No." "You ever been on your feet for 8 hours straight?" "No." Ray nodded slowly. "Good. Then you don't have to unlearn anything." He handed Landon an apron. "Tie that on. I'll show you the sink." Landon took the apron. Looked at it, the stained cotton, the frayed ties, the object so ordinary and so completely foreign to everything his life had been. He turned it over in his hands. Then he tied it on. Martha watched from across the kitchen. She watched the way his hands fumbled with the ties. This boy who was used to things that fastened with magnets and snaps and required no learning, struggling with a simple apron bow. She watched him figure it out. Watched him square his shoulders once he had it. She turned back to her prep work. The diner opened at 6. The morning rush hit by 7. By 7:30, Landon had dropped 1 plate, caught it before it hit the floor, but not before the noise made 3 tables look up. He'd poured coffee into a cup that was already full, and he'd taken an order at table 6, and then stood for 30 seconds trying to remember if he'd said hash browns or home fries. And Martha had come up beside him and said quietly, "Write it down." And he'd pulled out the notepad she'd given him and started writing. By 8, he'd gotten steadier. By 9, he'd stopped apologizing every time he made a mistake and started just fixing it. Duke came in at 9:15. He looked at Landon moving between tables, not graceful, not natural, but moving, working, bringing what was asked for, saying thank you when people thanked him, which they did, because people in Ash Hollow were fundamentally decent, and if a boy was trying, they would meet him in it. Duke caught Martha's eye across the diner. She shrugged slightly. "Jury's still out." He nodded. "Fair enough." At 11:40, a woman named Carol Steins, who was 63 and ate at Silver Pine every Tuesday, and whose husband Harold had died of a heart attack in the parking lot of this very diner 2 years ago, and who still came every Tuesday because it was the place they'd shared every Tuesday for 21 years. Carol Steins dropped her fork. Not dramatically. It just slipped off the table and clattered to the floor. She bent to get it and couldn't quite reach, and looked up with the expression of mild frustration older people get when their bodies decline to cooperate with small things. Landon was passing her table. He saw it before anyone else moved. He bent down, picked up the fork, and went to the counter and got her a clean one, and brought it back without being asked. "Thank you, sweetheart," Carol said. Landon said, "Yes, ma'am," and moved to the next table. Martha had seen it. She turned back to the counter and poured herself a half cup of coffee, the first full swallow she'd taken all morning, and drank it standing up. It was nothing. It was a fork. It was also the first completely natural, unperformed, unrehearsed kind thing she'd seen Landon Pierce do for another human being. She drank her coffee. At 2 o'clock, Landon untied his apron. His feet were wrecked, she could tell by the way he shifted his weight, the slight wince when he stepped wrong. His hands were red from the dishwater. He had a grease spot on his left sleeve from where he'd gotten too close to the counter during the rush. He looked like someone who'd worked for 8 hours. He looked, she thought, more real than he had 2 days ago. More present. Like the friction of actual effort had sanded something off the surface of him, and whatever was underneath was younger and rawer and more worth talking to. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked. "Same time tomorrow," she said. He nodded, picked up his jacket, stopped at the door. "Ms. Cole," he said. "Yeah." He looked like he was going to say something. Looked like he was going to find words for something that didn't quite have them yet. He stood in the doorway, 18 years old, and dishwasher wrinkled and tired in a way that was completely new to him. "Thank you," he said finally. For not making it easy. I think if you'd just taken the money, I would have gone back and I wouldn't have..." He stopped, shook his head. "Thank you." She looked at him. 6 a.m. she said. He went. Ray came to stand beside her, watching the door close. He said, which from Ray was practically a sonnet. Martha picked up her apron and folded it. Outside the window, two of Duke's men were still in the parking lot, unhurried and watchful. The video was at 900,000 views, according to the notification Cheryl had shown her at noon, which had then promptly broken 1 million sometime in the hour after. She had 17 unread press emails she was not going to answer. She had a caseworker from Family Services named Sandra Okafor, who'd called to confirm the inquiry was closed, and who had said before she hung up, "What you're doing for that boy is more than anyone asked of you." Martha hadn't known how to answer that. She still didn't. She just knew that when she picked up Eli from school in 20 minutes and he asked her how her day was, she was going to tell him good and mean it, actually mean it for the first time in longer than she could calculate. And tomorrow, at 6 a.m., a senator's son was going to tie on a stained cotton apron and pick up a coffee pot. And the morning after that. And the morning after that. The second week was harder than the first. Not because Landon got worse. Because he got better, and getting better meant he started understanding what he was looking at, and understanding it was heavier than ignorance had been. He'd learned the sync by day 3. Learned the rhythm of the grill tickets by day 5. By the end of week 1, he could carry 3 plates without watching his hands and take a 6-top order without losing anything. And Ray had said not bad on Friday afternoon, which Cheryl later told Landon was the closest thing to a standing ovation Ray had given anyone in 11 years. But in the second week, Landon started noticing things. He noticed that Martha never sat down before 10. He noticed that she drank her coffee cold because she never had time to drink it hot. He noticed that she did the closing inventory on the supply order every Wednesday because Ray's eyesight wasn't good enough anymore for the small print on the vendor forms, and she'd quietly taken it over without being asked. He noticed that she kept a granola bar in her apron pocket and ate it standing at the counter between the breakfast and lunch rush because that was the only gap in the day where eating was possible. On Wednesday of the second week, he put a full plate in front of her during that gap. Eggs toast, hash browns, the works. She looked at it, looked at him. Ray said it was a mistake plate, Landon said, which was not true, and they both knew it. She ate it. She didn't say thank you, and she didn't say anything about the lie, which was its own form of acceptance, and Landon went back to the dishes. That evening, he called his father. "I want to talk about the tuition fund," he said. Dale Pierce was quiet for a moment. "What about it?" "1 semester was the agreement. I want to make it 2. Another pause. It's my tuition, Dad. The fund my grandfather left me. Mine to direct." His voice was steady in a way it hadn't been before their conversation in the diner. "I want 2 semesters worth in that account. And I want it done before I go back to school." "Landon." "Dad?" He stopped, took a breath. "I've been watching a woman work herself into the ground every single day for a kid who isn't even hers by blood, and she does it without asking anyone for a thing. And the only reason her life isn't wrecked right now is because 10 strangers on motorcycles decided to care." He paused. "The least I can do is make sure some other kid in this county doesn't have to go without school supplies because their parents are running the same math she is." The silence from Dale Pierce lasted long enough that Landon thought the call had dropped. Then his father said, "I'll have the paperwork updated." "Thank you." "Your grandfather would have liked you," Dale said. Quietly. With something underneath it that Landon didn't have a name for yet, but recognized as the sound of a man who'd made a lot of wrong turns and knew it. He was stubborn like that too. Landon hung up. Stood in his car in the parking lot of the motel he'd been staying in. He hadn't gone back to the ranch, hadn't wanted the distance, and sat in the quiet for a while. Then he went to bed at 9 o'clock, because 6 a.m. started real early, when you'd been on your feet for 8 hours. The video cracked 2 million on a Thursday. Martha found out when Sandra Okafor, the Family Services caseworker who'd closed the inquiry and apparently hadn't entirely stopped following the situation, texted her a screenshot with no caption, just 3 exclamation points. Martha looked at the number, put her phone away, and went back to folding napkins. The press had found the diner by then. Not a flood, Ash Hollow was too far off any reasonable route for a full media invasion. But 2 reporters had driven up from Cheyenne, one had come from Denver, and a woman from a national outlet had called Ray directly and asked if she could set up a camera inside. Ray had said no, with a completeness and brevity that apparently left no room for follow-up questions. What he had agreed to was a short statement which Martha wrote at the kitchen table at 11 at night while Eli slept, and which Ray read on his porch to the reporters who came in person. Silver Pine Diner is a place where people are treated with dignity. That's been true for 31 years, and it'll be true for 31 more. That's all we have to say. The statement got picked up. People liked it. The kind of people who share things online who Martha could not have picked out of a lineup, but who apparently existed in very large numbers, shared it extensively, and by Friday morning, the diner's phone number had appeared on a food website's list of places worth driving to, which was the kind of attention that was good for business, and complicated for Martha's ability to get through a shift without someone asking to take a photo with her. She drew a line on the photos. Ray backed her up on it, telling 2 separate people on Friday that this was a working diner, and the staff were working, and if they wanted to support the place, they could order breakfast and leave a good tip, which several of them did. Duke came in every morning that week, sometimes alone, sometimes with 1 or 2 of the others. He sat at the counter and ordered the same thing and watched the room with the same unhurried attention he brought to everything. On Thursday morning, he watched Landon handle a difficult customer. The man was in his 50s, a type Martha recognized immediately, not malicious, just deeply used to getting exactly what he wanted, and mildly indignant when the universe varied from that. He'd ordered his eggs over medium, and they'd come over easy, which was Ray's error, and he'd flagged Landon down with the plate held up like evidence. "These are over easy," the man said. "Yes, sir. I apologize. I'll get those redone. I've been waiting 20 minutes already." "I understand. I'll make it fast." Landon took the plate back toward the kitchen, and the man called after him, "And the toast is cold." Landon stopped, turned. His jaw was slightly tight. Martha could see it from across the room. The old Landon, the one from 2 weeks ago, would have said something, would have let the irritation out in some small, sharp way. "This," Landon said. "I'll bring fresh toast right now while the eggs come up. On the house. I'm sorry for the wait." He went to the kitchen. Duke watched him go. Then he looked at Martha. 2 weeks, she said. Duke nodded slowly. "What's your read?" She thought about it honestly. "He's not performing anymore. First week some of it was still performance, like he knew people were watching, and he was being patient for an audience. Now," she paused, "now he's just doing it. He corrected himself before I could correct him twice yesterday. He saw Mrs. Holloway's cane fall under the table and had it back to her before she could ask. Is that enough?" "It's not about enough," she said. "It's about direction. He's moving the right way." She picked up a rag, wiped the counter. "Whether it sticks when he goes back to his life, that's the part I don't know." Duke didn't answer that because it was an honest question without a ready answer, and he was a man who'd learned not to offer certainty where he didn't have it. Landon came back with fresh toast, delivered it without drama. The man said thank you in the subdued tone of someone whose indignation has been diffused and who is now slightly embarrassed about the fuss. Landon went back to the floor. The twist came on Friday of the second week, and it came from a direction no one had anticipated. A woman named Helena Cross walked into Silver Pine Diner at 10:15 on a Friday morning. She was dressed like someone from a city, not ostentatiously, but in the way that read out of place in Ash Hollow without trying to. She took a table near the window, ordered coffee, and spent 20 minutes looking at her phone before she asked Cheryl, not Martha, which was the first tell whether the owner was available. Ray came out from this kitchen. Helena Cross gave him a card. Said she was with a production company out of Los Angeles. Said the story of Silver Pine Diner had gotten considerable attention, and her company was developing a documentary series on, she used the phrase, community resilience and the power of accountability, and they were interested in speaking with Martha Cole. Ray took the card, said he'd pass it along. Came to find Martha. Martha looked at the card for 30 seconds. Then she walked out to Helena Cross's table and sat down. "I'm going to stop you before you start," Martha said. "I'm not interested in a documentary." Helena Cross had the composure of someone who heard no frequently and had made a profession out of the space between no and yes. "I understand. Can I ask why?" "Because my life isn't content," Martha said. "Eli isn't content. What happened in this diner, what's still happening, it's not a story for someone else to tell. It's just our life." "The video already made it public." "The video made one moment public," Martha said. "That's different from handing someone a camera and saying, 'Here, come look at us.'" She folded her hands on the table. "The answer is no. But since you drove up here from wherever you came from, I'll tell you this. If your company actually cares about community resilience, there's an education fund for children in this county that was just endowed by Senator Pierce's office. That's a story. It'll do actual good. I'll give you the school district's number if you want it." Helena Cross looked at her, looked at the card in Martha's hand, looked around the diner at Ray behind the grill at Cheryl, moving between tables at Landon, carrying 2 plates to table 3 at the particular ordinary texture of a place where people had chosen each other. "You'd really rather I covered the fund," she said. "I'd rather you covered the fund," Martha said. "There are 47 kids in this county who qualified for tutoring assistance last year and only 12 who actually got it because there wasn't money. That's a story. That helps people." She slid the card back across the table. "This," she gestured at herself at the diner. "This is just breakfast." Helena Cross picked up her card, looked at it. Then she took out her own notebook paper, not phone, which Martha noted and said, "Give me the school district's number." Afterward, Duke, who had watched the whole thing from the counter and said nothing, leaned over and said quietly, "You know that fund's going to get a lot more attention now." "That's the point," Martha said. He almost smiled. "You're better at this than you think." "I'm not good at anything," she said. "I'm just tired of watching things that matter get used for things that don't." Duke drank his coffee. "Same thing." The third week brought Eli, not by design. On a Tuesday when Eli's school had a half-day, and Martha's neighbor Donna, who usually watched him during the overlap, had a doctor's appointment that ran long. Eli arrived at Silver Pine Diner at 11:30 with his backpack and his too big coat and his assessment mode expression, and took a seat at the end of the counter. Landon was bussing table 5 when Eli came in. He stopped, looked at the boy, looked at Martha. Martha gave him a look that said working on it and went back to her section. Eli watched Landon clear the table plates, stacked correctly. Cups nested napkins collected before the wipe down so the crumbs didn't spread. He watched with the focused attention of a kid cataloging something new. "You work here now," Eli said when Landon came back past him. "For now," Landon said. "Did you get in trouble?" Landon considered lying. Looked at the 9-year-old's face, which had the radar of a kid who'd learned early to read adults, and decided lying wasn't going to work. "Yes," he said. "What did you do?" Landon set down his bus tub, looked at Eli levelly. "I was rude to your grandmother, and I put my hand on her when she didn't want me to." Eli processed this. "Did you say sorry?" "I did." "Did she accept it?" "She gave me a job instead." Eli looked at the apron, at the bus tub, at Landon's dish-reddened hands. "Is that better than sorry?" "Yeah," Landon said. "I think it is." Eli nodded slowly, the nod of a child rendering a verdict. "My friend Marcus got in trouble for hitting someone on the playground. He had to eat lunch with the principal for a week. He said it was bad, but then he said it was okay because the principal had better snacks." "Silver lining," Landon said. "What's that?" "When something bad has a good part inside it." Eli thought about this. "Grammy says that about everything." "She's probably right about everything." Eli looked at him for a moment longer. Then he unzipped his backpack and took out his homework, a worksheet on multiplication that he spread on the counter in front of him, with the air of someone settling in for the duration. Landon went back to work. At noon, Martha came past the counter and found Landon sitting on the stool next to Eli's during the brief stillness between the end of the breakfast rush and the start of lunch, helping him with 7 times 8, which Eli kept getting wrong because he was counting on his fingers and losing track at 6. "You're counting wrong," Landon was saying. "Start from 5, not 1. 5 sevens is 35, then you only need 3 more. 3 sevens is 21. 35 plus 21 is 56, Eli said. Then his eyes went wide with the particular delight of a child who has just understood something mechanical about numbers. 56, Grammy, did you hear that? I heard, Martha said. He teaches good. He teaches well, she said. That's what I said. She looked at Landon over Eli's head. He looked back at her. There was something in his face that was new. Not the stripped-back rawness of week 1, not the determined effort of week 2. Something that had settled. Something that was just him, the version that existed underneath all the insulation, and it was younger and less certain, and considerably more worth knowing than anything she'd seen 2 weeks ago. She went back to her tables. The second big twist arrived that same afternoon at 1:15 in the form of a certified letter delivered to Silver Pine Diner, addressed to Martha Cole. She opened it in the back, standing near the supply shelves, while Ray pretended to count inventory behind her. It was from the Wyoming Labor Standards Office. A formal inquiry into Silver Pine Diner's wage compliance premises safety record and employee classification practices. She read it twice. Then she folded it and put it in her apron pocket and stood very still for 30 seconds. Ray was watching her. What is it? She handed it to him. He read it. His face did something complicated and not quiet. This wasn't family services this time, he said. No, she said. This is somebody looking for something that sticks. Dale Pierce wouldn't... Ray stopped himself, reconsidered. He said he sent the retraction to family services, Martha said. He increased the education fund. He didn't pick up the phone for this one. She straightened. Someone else did. Ray looked at the letter again. Labor standards can make things very difficult. Even if everything's clean, the inspection process alone. Everything is clean, Martha said, firmly. Because it was. Because she knew every number in this diner, every hour, every form. She'd lived in the arithmetic of this place for 3 years. I know, Ray said. But it costs time and lawyers and... Frank Adler, she said. She called Frank from the back office. Frank was quiet for a moment after she read him the letter. Then, get me the original filed date and the case number in the top right corner. She read them out. Another quiet. Then, Martha. This complaint was filed 9 days ago. 9 days ago, she calculated. That's 3 days before the video went public, Frank said. 3 days before anyone outside Ash Hollow knew your name. The math landed. Someone filed this before the video, she said. Before there was any public story, Frank said, which means this isn't retaliation for the video. This was in motion before Dale Pierce even called you, before the education fund, before any of it. He paused. I need to ask you something, Martha. In the time before that morning, before Landon Pierce walked into your diner, did anything else happen? Anyone else? Any conversation? Any complaint? Anything that someone might have wanted to use against you? She thought. She thought about the last few months. The bills, Eli's school, the guardianship. Ray's lease renewal with the building owner, which had gotten complicated in November, when the building owner had gotten a development inquiry from someone who wanted to put a chain restaurant in that spot. And Ray had said no, and the building owner had said he'd think about it. The building owner's name was Gerald Fitch. Gerald Fitch was on the county zoning board. Gerald Fitch had gone to college with Dale Pierce. Frank, she said. Yeah. I think it might be bigger than one phone call. She heard him writing. Tell me everything. She did. When she came back out to the floor 20 minutes later, Landon was behind the counter covering for her without being asked. He'd taken 2 orders refilled 4 coffees and was currently explaining to Carol Steins that the soup of the day was chicken noodle, not chicken rice, but that he would personally ask Ray if he could do a half portion of rice on the side if she wanted. Carol Steins was charmed. Carol Steins was going to tell everyone she knew. Martha stood at the kitchen entrance and watched him. He saw her, read something in her face because he was better at that now 3 weeks in than he'd been on day 1, which was the kind of thing that happened when you spent 8 hours a day actually paying attention to people. "Everything okay?" he asked quietly when he passed her. "Working on it," she said. "Can I help?" She looked at him. 18 years old, stained apron, dish-reddened hands, asking a woman he'd humiliated 3 weeks ago if there was something he could do. "Yeah," she said. "Actually." He waited. "Your father's friend Gerald Fitch. Do you know him?" Something shifted in Landon's face. "He came to the ranch a few times when I was growing up." "Why?" "I'll explain later. Does he know your father agreed to the fund? Does he know where things stand?" "I don't know. Dad doesn't tell me everything." "Would he talk to you?" Landon looked at her steadily. "You want me to call a 60-year-old man my father drinks bourbon with and ask him what he knows about a labor complaint filed against a diner?" "Not ask," she said. "Just talk. You're good at talking now." He almost laughed. Almost. "That's generous." "I mean it." He thought about it for 3 seconds. "Give me his number." He made the call on his break standing in the parking lot, and Martha watched through the window without watching the way you observe something you can't control and have decided to trust. He was on the phone for 11 minutes. When he came back in, he untied his apron, retied it. A move that had become, without anyone designating it as such, his version of taking a breath. "Fitch didn't file it," he said. "He knew about it, but it came from higher." "Higher than Fitch. Higher than my father." He held her gaze. "There's a state-level PAC, a political action committee that Dale Pierce has been connected to for years. They don't like what the video did to his image. They're not interested in the education fund or the agreement. They want the story buried." He paused. Filing against the diner was supposed to give the narrative somewhere else to go. Diner under investigation replaces senator's son, grabs waitress. Martha stood with this for a moment. "They don't know Ray's books are clean," she said. "They were counting on the investigation process being enough," Landon said. "Even if it clears the headlines run first." "How do you know all this?" "Because Fitch is 63 and he's been carrying other people's decisions for 40 years and he's tired," Landon said simply. "I just asked him how he was. He talked." Martha looked at him, at the stained apron and the boy inside it. Duke came through this door at that precise moment, timing that felt less like coincidence and more like the universe having a sense of structure, and took one look at Martha's face and said, "What happened?" "Sit down," she said. "We have work to do." Duke sat. Landon sat across from him. Martha stood between them at the counter and laid out everything Frank had told her, everything Landon had just learned, and everything she knew about the arithmetic of this fight, which was getting larger and more complicated and more necessary than a video, a apron, or a diner had any right to generate. When she finished, the diner was quiet except for Ray's grill and Carol Steins asking Cheryl about the soup. Duke looked at Landon. "You willing to put your name on what Fitch told you?" Landon didn't hesitate. "Yes." Duke looked at Martha. "Frank Adler needs to know this tonight." "I'm calling him when I leave," she said. Duke nodded. He reached into his jacket pocket and put a folded piece of paper on the counter. "Got something for you too." He pushed it toward her. She unfolded it. It was a list of names. 31 of them. Residents of Ash Hollow and the surrounding county. At the bottom, in Duke's handwriting, people who want to testify to what this diner and this woman have meant to this community. Whenever you need them. She looked at the list. She looked at him. "You've been doing this for 3 weeks," she said. "Been doing it for 3 weeks," he confirmed. She folded the paper carefully, put it in her apron pocket next to the granola bar and the labor inquiry letter, and the accumulated weight of a life that had just gotten considerably harder to knock down. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me," Duke said. "I've been eating breakfast here for 3 weeks. This is the best diner in Wyoming. I'm protecting my interests." Ray called from the kitchen. "Order up." Martha went back to work. Frank Adler filed the response to the labor inquiry at 8:15 the following morning. He didn't file a simple rebuttal. He filed a comprehensive counter-complaint, 63 pages of payroll records, inspection certificates, employee classifications, tax filings, and wage documentation. Going back 31 months. Every number clean and precise, and presented in the particular way that lawyers present things when they want the other side to understand that they have been thoroughly outmatched in their own game. Attached to it was a formal request for disclosure regarding who had originated the complaint. Because labor inquiries didn't self-generate, someone had signed the originating paperwork, and that signature was a matter of public record once a counter-complaint triggered review. Frank called Martha at 9 to tell her it was done. "How long until they have to respond?" she asked. 15 business days on the disclosure. The inspection itself, they'll either proceed or withdraw within 10. He paused. Landon Pierce's account of his conversation with Fitch is useful, but I want it in writing. Signed. Can he do that? "I'll ask him," she said. Landon was already at the diner when she arrived. He had the coffee going and the chairs off the tables and was running the mop across the front section with the focus of someone who had decided to be good at something most people considered beneath them. He'd developed an efficiency over 4 weeks that Ray had observed twice with quiet approval and commented on 0 times, which was the Ray equivalent of a standing ovation every single day. Martha told him what Frank needed. Landon put the mop against the wall. "Signed statement about what Fitch told me." "Yes." "That puts me directly against the pack," he said. Not afraid, just accounting for it. Running the math the way she'd taught him without flinching from what the numbers were. "It does," she said. "That's why I'm asking instead of assuming." He picked up the mop, put it back in motion. "Send me Frank's email," he said. "I'll have it to him by noon." She sent it. He wrote the statement on his phone during his 10 o'clock break, sitting on an overturned milk crate outside the kitchen entrance, thumbs moving with the particular focus of a person saying something they've decided to mean. He sent it at 11:40. Frank acknowledged it at 11:43. The PAC's lawyer called Frank at 2:15 that afternoon. Frank called Martha at 2:20. "They want to settle," he said. She was in the parking lot 5 minutes from Eli's pickup. She stopped walking. "The labor inquiry. All of it. They want a comprehensive agreement. They withdraw the inquiry. They issue a formal statement that the complaint was filed in error, and in exchange you sign a non-disparagement clause and agree not to pursue civil action against the PAC or any of its affiliated entities." She stood with that. "What does the non-disparagement mean in practice?" she asked. "It means you don't talk publicly about the PAC's role in filing the complaint. You can still talk about everything else, the incident, Landon, the diner, the fund. Just not the PAC specifically. Can I think about it? You have 72 hours before they move forward with the inspection schedule." "I'll call you tonight," she said. She picked up Eli. He came out with paint on his left hand from art class and a drawing rolled up in his fist that turned out when unrolled in the car to be a picture of the diner, recognizable primarily by the sign, which Eli had rendered in large red letters, and by the figures outside, 2 of which were clearly motorcycles, and 1 of which was Martha herself, identified by the apron. "That's you," Eli said, helpfully pointing. "I see that." "And those are the motorcycle men." "They are." "I drew it for Duke," he said. "Can I give it to him?" She looked at the drawing, at the careful way Eli had colored the sky not blue, but a pale lavender, which was the color of Wyoming early mornings, and she hadn't known he'd noticed that. Hadn't known he was paying that kind of attention to the world around him, and the simple fact of it that this 9-year-old was watching the world and finding it worth drawing hit her somewhere she didn't have a quick defense for. "Yeah, baby," she said. "We'll give it to him." She called Frank at 9 that night after Eli was in bed. "I'm not signing the non-disparagement," she said. Frank was quiet. They filed a bad faith complaint against a working-class diner owned by a 64-year-old veteran to protect a political organization's image, she said. "The people of this county deserve to know that's how these things work. I'm not going to take money to keep quiet about it." "Martha, the inspection could be genuinely disruptive." "Let them inspect," she said. "Every number Ray has is clean. Let them come in, let them look at every record we've got, and let the whole thing play out in the open. When they find nothing, that's also a story." She paused. "And when the disclosure comes back, showing who signed the originating complaint, that's a story too. This could take months. I've been doing hard things for months for most of my life," she said. "I know how long they take." A long pause. "I'll tell them no," Frank said. And there was something in his voice, a professional restraint barely covering what sounded like admiration. "Get some sleep." She almost laughed. "Sure." She sat at the kitchen table for a while after the call. The scratch in the wood. The ring from Eli's glass. The imperfect surface of this life. She put her hand flat on the table, palm down, feeling the grain of it, cheap wood, old table hers. She thought about her sister Carrie in whatever city she was in, and whether she ever thought about Eli, and decided that thinking about it didn't do any good and set it down. She thought about the morning 5 weeks ago when she'd been counting sounds in the house, and Eli had made his egg decision, and she'd eaten nothing and called it winning. She thought about how much had changed and how much hadn't. The table was still cheap. The wood was still scratched. She still worked $11 an hour. She still woke up at 5:40 because her body had stopped believing in the possibility of sleeping past it. But the labor inquiry was contested, not swallowed. The education fund was real and growing. 31 names were folded in her apron pocket. And tomorrow at 5:50, there would be a senator's son standing outside the diner door who had learned that Eggs Benedict wasn't on the menu, and that scrambled and dry were different instructions, and that sometimes the most important thing you could do for another person was just show up. She went to bed. She slept. The labor standards inspection happened on a Wednesday 3 weeks after the inquiry was filed. 2 inspectors, professional neutral, doing a job. They came at 7, which was the peak of the morning rush, which Martha suspected was not an accident. Inspections during peak hours created maximum disruption, maximum stress, maximum opportunity for something to look wrong. Duke's men came in at 6:55, all 10 of them. They took the long booth and the 2 four-tops pushed together, same configuration as the very first morning. They ordered the full plate, 10 of them, same as always. They were the first customers through the door, which meant they were seated and calm and thoroughly, immovably present when the inspectors arrived at 7. The inspectors did their work. They checked the records Ray had already pulled and stacked in the back office in reverse chronological order, a detail Frank had suggested because organized records communicate competence in a way that matters. They checked the kitchen safety compliance. They verified employee classifications, hours, wage records. Landon worked through all of it. He didn't stop working when the inspectors arrived. He bussed tables and took orders and carried plates and said, "Excuse me," when he needed to move past one of the inspectors near the supply closet, and said it without irony, without performance, just as the natural thing to say when you needed to move past someone. He had been doing this for 5 weeks. He was good at it now. And the particular mundanity of a senator's son working the floor of a Wyoming diner during a state inspection completely unfazed had a quality to it that was its own statement about what had happened in this place over the past month. One of the inspectors, a woman in her 40s named Chen, watched him carry a 4-plate arrangement to table 6 without dropping anything. She looked at Martha. "Is that—" "Yes," Martha said. Chen looked back at Landon, said nothing, made a note that Martha couldn't read. The inspection took 4 hours. At 11:15, the lead inspector, a man named Walsh, came to the back office where Ray was sitting with his coffee and his records and the particular stillness of a man who has done nothing wrong and knows it and is angry anyway because being investigated feels like an accusation regardless. "Mr. Dufresne," Walsh said, Your records are in excellent order. We have no findings. Ray looked at him. No findings. None. Walsh clicked his pen closed. You'll receive the formal clearance in writing within 5 business days. Ray nodded. Walsh left. Ray sat in the office for a moment. Then he put his face in his hands. Not crying, just releasing something he'd been holding rigid for 3 weeks. His shoulders dropped. His whole frame dropped. He breathed. Martha stood in the doorway. Ray? I know, he said into his hands. I know. Give me a minute. She gave him a minute. When he came back out to the grill, he didn't say anything to anyone. He just started cooking, and the food he made that noon service was, everyone agreed later, comparing notes the way small-town people do the best Ray had ever produced. Something about the release of tension translated directly into his hands, and the eggs were perfect, and the bacon was exactly right. And Carol Steins, who came in for her Tuesday soup, even though it was Wednesday, because she'd heard about the inspection and wanted to show up, said that the chicken noodle was the best she'd had since Harold was alive. Ray said thank you. He meant it. The disclosure came back on a Friday 13 business days after Frank filed the request. The signature on the originating labor complaint belonged to a man named Arthur Voss, who was the operations director of the PACA. Name that meant very little to the people of Ash Hollow, but that Frank recognized immediately, and that 2 of the journalists who'd been following the story recognized when Frank's office, with Martha's explicit authorization, released the disclosure publicly that same afternoon. By Saturday morning, it was a state political story. By Sunday, it was national. Not because of Martha. She gave no interviews, made no statements, answered no calls from numbers she didn't recognize. But because Arthur Voss and the PAC had made the specific miscalculated error of going after something small and ordinary and clean, and when the records showed nothing, what remained was just the naked shape of the thing, a political organization using a state labor office to punish a waitress for being on a video that was inconvenient. That story told itself. Martha didn't have to touch it. Dale Pierce called on Sunday afternoon. She answered. He didn't use the campaign voice this time. He sounded like a man who was tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. I didn't know about Voss, he said. I want you to know that. I believe you, she said, because she did, actually. Dale Pierce had made his accommodations and kept them. The retraction to family services, the increased fund, the daily presence of his son in an apron, none of that was the behavior of a man running a parallel operation against her. But they did it because of your relationship with them, because they thought they were protecting you. Silence. That's on me, he said, quietly. I know. What are you going to do about it? Another silence, longer. I'm going to have to make some decisions about who I've been letting speak for me. He stopped. Landon told me something last week. He said you told him that you didn't know if what changed in him would stick when he went back to his life. He paused. I've been thinking about that. And I think the same thing is true of me, Dale Pierce said. I don't know if it'll stick, but I'm thinking about it. That's more than I was doing a month ago. She stood in her kitchen, put her hand on the table. That's somewhere to start, she said. She hung up. She stood there for a moment. Then she called Eli in from the other room. What? He said, appearing in the doorway with a book under his arm and his socks falling off again. Nothing. Just wanted to see you. He looked at her with the measurement of a child who knew when adults were being unnecessarily sentimental. Okay, he said with tolerance, and went back to his room. She laughed. Actually laughed, the kind that comes from somewhere real. Landon's last day was a Thursday. He'd done 62 days in total, 2 extra, because his last scheduled day fell on a Tuesday, and he'd asked Martha, unprompted, if he could finish out the week. She'd said yes. He came in at 5:50, same as always. Tied on his apron, he could do it behind his back now, which Cheryl had taught him in week 3 as a diner efficiency trick, and which he'd practiced until it was automatic. He worked the full shift. The whole diner knew it was his last day, and nobody made a ceremony of it, which was the most dignified possible response, treating it like a regular Thursday, because that was the respect of people who'd watched him earn his way into the rhythm of the place. At 1:50 with 10 minutes left, Carol Steins came up to the counter. She had an envelope in her hand. "This is from the Tuesday regulars," she told Landon. She said it in front of him. "We had a collection." Landon looked at the envelope, looked at Carol. "Mrs. Steins, I can't—" "It's not a lot," she said firmly. "And it's not charity. It's a tip, which is what you give a server who's done good work, and you have done good work, and Harold always said the most disrespectful thing you can do is refuse what someone offers from the heart." She looked at him over her glasses. "So you take that?" Landon took it. "Thank you," he said. "You're a better boy than you started," Carol said. "That's not nothing. Don't waste it." She patted the counter twice, the Carol Steins version of a benediction, and went back to her table. Landon held the envelope, set it down, picked it up again. Duke came in at 2, which was technically after the shift, but which Martha had known he would because Duke Calloway was a man who showed up when it mattered, and this mattered. He sat at the counter, looked at Landon. "How do you feel?" he asked. Landon thought about it. "Tired. Good tired." He paused. "Scared. Of going back." "Yeah." He turned the envelope in his hands. "Of going back to where everything's easy again, and forgetting that easy isn't the same as right." He looked at Duke. "How do you, when you came back from deployment, how do you keep the things you learned from just—" He made a gesture, something dissolving. Duke was quiet for a moment. "You don't keep them," he said. "Not passively. You have to choose them every day in the little things. Every time you're in a room where someone's being treated like furniture, you have a choice. Every time something's inconvenient and you want to just let someone else carry it, you have a choice." He looked at Landon. "It doesn't get easier, but it gets more natural. And one day you realize the person making the choice without thinking about it is you." Landon nodded, looked at his hands. "Mr. Calloway," he said, "can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "Why did you come back?" "After that first morning you were done, you'd handled it. You had your breakfast. You could have ridden out and let whatever happened happen." He met Duke's eyes. "Why every morning?" Duke picked up his coffee cup, held it, set it down without drinking. "Because she reminded me of someone," he said simply. "Who? My mother." He said it without sentimentality, straight and plain. She worked 2 jobs her whole life and never asked for a single thing she didn't earn, and when she needed people around her, they weren't there. He looked at the counter. "I was 22 and in basic training when she got sick, and by the time I got back, it was done." He breathed. "You don't get those moments back, but every now and then you get a different version of them, and if you're paying attention, you don't miss it twice." The diner was quiet. Landon looked at him for a long moment. Then he stood up, and he did something that clearly cost him something, not because it was hard, but because it was completely genuine, and he was 18, and 18-year-old boys are not good at completely genuine yet. He held out his hand. Duke shook it. "Thank you," Landon said. "For the morning you stood up." Duke held his hand for a moment. "Don't thank me," he said. "Be different. That's all I want." Landon picked up his apron, folded it carefully the way Martha had shown him in week 1/3 and then thirds again, so it lay flat and clean. He set it on the counter. Martha came up beside him. He looked at her. There were things in his face that hadn't been there 62 days ago. A weight, a texture, the particular quality of someone who has been allowed to see something true and has decided to let it change them. He was still 18. He still had all of the disadvantages of his father's world ahead of him, all the insulation that money and name would wrap back around him the moment he stepped out of this diner. She knew that. He probably knew it too. "Ms. Cole," he said. "Yeah, I'm going to be different." He said it simply, not as a vow, not with performance, just as a statement of intent, the kind a person makes when they've stopped trying to convince anyone and have started just deciding. "I don't know how long it takes, or if I'll get it right every time, but I'm going to try." She looked at him. "I know," she said. Because she did. Because she'd watched him for 62 mornings, and she could read the difference between someone trying to look changed and someone who actually was. She reached into her apron pocket, brought out the folded piece of paper Eli's drawing, the diner, the lavender sky, the apron figure, the motorcycles. "Eli wanted Duke to have it," she said. "But I think you should have a copy." She unfolded it, let him see it. He drew it from memory. He drew this place as home. Because it is. She met his eyes. "You're part of this now, whether you like it or not. You helped build something here. That's not nothing either." Landon looked at the drawing. He pressed his lips together, held it together the way young men do when they're trying to and almost making it. "Tell him thank you," he said. "Tell him yourself," she said. "You're allowed to come back for breakfast. Just pay for it." He almost laughed. Made it most of the way. "Yes, ma'am." He walked to the door, stopped with his hand on it, looked back at the diner, at Duke at the counter, at Ray behind the grill, at Cheryl, counting her section at Carol Stein's, with her soup at the long booth with two of the men who still came in every morning, like it was a job they'd chosen because it was. He pushed open the door. The bell chimed once, bright and clean. He walked out into the Wyoming morning. Martha stood at the counter. Ray came out from the kitchen, stood beside her. They both looked at the door for a moment. "Good kid," Ray said, which from Ray was everything. "Getting there," Martha said, which from her was the highest thing. 3 weeks later, the PAC issued a public statement acknowledging that the labor complaint against Silver Pine Diner had been filed without adequate foundation and expressing in the careful lawyered language of organizations that have been caught regret for any disruption caused. Arthur Voss resigned his position as operations director the following Monday. The PAC's relationship with Dale Pierce's campaign was according to a brief statement from the senator's office under review. The education fund by that point had received additional contributions from 47 individuals and 3 small businesses in Teton County, most of whom had read about it when Helena Cross's production company did a short piece on it. Not about Martha, not about the diner, just about the fund and the kids it was helping, which was what Martha had asked for, and which was exactly what got made. The Wyoming Labor Standards Office sent Silver Pine Diner's formal clearance on a Tuesday certified mail signed by the director. Ray framed it and put it on the wall near the register, which was the only thing he'd ever framed in 31 years of running the place, and which meant to everyone who knew Ray precisely everything. Eli came into the diner after school one Friday in January and sat at the counter and did his homework and ate a grilled cheese that Ray made without being asked, because he'd started making one whenever Eli came in, which was Ray's version of love, and everyone knew it. Duke was at the counter. He'd kept coming 3 or 4 mornings a week, even after the crisis had passed, because this was the best diner in Wyoming, and he'd said so, and he meant it. Eli gave him the drawing. Duke unfolded it, looked at the lavender sky, the apron figure, the motorcycles. He looked at it for a long moment. "You drew this from memory?" he asked. "Yeah," Eli said. "It's what home looks like." Duke folded it carefully, put it in the inside pocket of his cut against his chest, which was where he kept the photograph of his mother. "Thank you," he said. Eli shrugged with the magnificent casualness of a 9-year-old who had no idea what he'd just done. "You're welcome. Can I have a cookie?" "Ask Ray," Duke said. Ray was already bringing one. Martha watched all of this from across the diner. She was pouring coffee at table 4, which was where she always was, which was exactly where she needed to be, on her feet in her place, carrying what was hers to carry. She'd counted sounds this morning the way she always did. The floor creak, the radiator, the faucet drip, which she had finally 2 weeks ago fixed herself with a YouTube tutorial and $12 in parts, which had given her more satisfaction than almost anything in recent memory. She counted them and found them good. This was the arithmetic of her life, not comfortable, not easy, not the kind of math that balanced neatly, but hers fully and finally and without apology. And around her was what she had built and what had grown up around what she had built. The counter and the grill and the long booth, Ray's coffee and Cheryl's efficiency, and Carol's soup, and Duke's quiet watchfulness, and one 9-year-old boy with paint on his hands who drew lavender skies because he'd noticed them and thought they were worth keeping. Outside, the motorcycles were parked in a quiet row in the January cold chrome patient against the pale light. Martha Cole tied her apron tighter, picked up her coffee pot, and walked back into the floor. Some women are broken by the weight of the world. Martha Cole had held hers for 30 years, and the weight had not broken her. It had made her the kind of woman that 10 veterans rise for. That a senator's son takes 62 days to become worthy of that, a 9-year-old draws from memory and calls home. That is who she was. That is who she had always been. The diner opened at 6 and closed at 9, 5 days a week, same as always. And every morning without fail, the coffee was hot. The eggs were done right, and the woman behind the counter was exactly where she chose to be, standing on her own ground, unbowed, unbroken, and not going anywhere.